The Flash is a $200 million time travel movie that explains its own rule 3 different ways, yet none of them agree with each other. Steins is an anime about a self-proclaimed mad scientist who accidentally turns a microwave into a time machine with a banana, and it never breaks a single rule across 24 episodes, a sequel, a film, and 3 visual novels. Both are stories about a man desperate to rewrite the past to save someone he loves, but one of them is the greatest time travel story ever told, while the other can't even follow its own explanation. And no, this isn't about the CGI babies, or the running, or that other thing. Even with $1 billion budget and a media-trained star, the time travel in The Flash would still be nonsensical, because the problem is in the writing. There are 3 L's in time travel. Wait, hold on a second. Okay, now there are 3 L's in time travel. 3 rules that the universe enforces whether the writer respects them or not, and The Flash forgot all 3. The first L is logic, because time travel is the only genre where the audience is actively trying to catch you. They'll forgive bad physics, but they will not forgive you breaking your own rules. Because if even the writer doesn't respect the logic of their own story, why should anyone else? Or in the words of Bob Gale, a co-writer to Back to the Future, the modern standard for time travel stories. There's real logic, and then there's movie logic. If you create movie logic and you stick with it, people will buy it, even if it doesn't make much sense. Logic means establish clear rules and never break them. You can set whatever rules you want. The only thing that matters is that once you set the rule, you never break it. And the small tip to teach an audience your rules is to demonstrate them with small stakes before you introduce your audience to the big ones. Show how time travel works. Don't tell them how it works. Or more simply, show, don't tell. The Flash does the opposite. It explains time travel 3 different times, with each explanation contradicting the last. First of all, they have Batman explain it. Look, I like some of the Clooney Batman movies, but what the does he know about time travel? Putting that aside, they decided to use spaghetti to explain it. He holds 2 pieces of uncooked spaghetti. Timelines are straight lines. They intersect at a single point and are not parallel. One change, one shared event, with everything else being completely different. Then he throws all that away, cooks the spaghetti, and says, if you mess with time enough, the strands tangle. Timelines curving into each other, intersecting at dozens of points instead of one. Which is a completely different model that the movie pretends is a logical follow-up to the first. Straight lines that touch once and tangled lines that touch everywhere are not the same idea explained 2 ways. It's like saying a straight man and a gay man is attracted to the same person. You know one of them is lying. And the movie uses whichever one is convenient. Uncooked spaghetti when it needs Nora's death to stay fixed. Cooked spaghetti when it needs Keaton's Batman to show up. Then the Chrono Ball introduces a third model. Universes or different timelines as colliding spears, which contradicts both. Let me just draw these 3 models side by side so you can see how little they agree with each other. Explanation A, rigid lines that only ever touch once. Explanation B, tangled strands that bend and intersect whenever they feel like it. Explanation C, floating bubbles that barely acknowledge each other's existence except for the fact that they are cameos of past shows and movies that DC has created before. So, are timelines straight lines, parallel curves, colliding bubbles? Even the movie doesn't know. It just reaches for whichever strand of spaghetti gets it through the current scene. And that's just the explanation. Once the movie starts actually showing us its rules of time travel, it gets worse. The film tells us certain events are fixed points in time. Zod's arrival, fixed. Happens on the exact same day, no matter what. But Bruce Wayne's birth and his parents' death aren't fixed to a date, just fixed to the concept of Batman has to exist. Keaton's Bruce is over 20 years older than Affleck's. His parents died decades earlier. That is not a fixed point in time. If a fixed point can slide 20 years in either direction, then it isn't fixed. And if it isn't fixed, then Nora's death should be just as flexible. Which is the one thing the movie is telling us Barry can't change. The movie accidentally proves that Barry can save his mom. Because if a fixed point isn't a fixed point in time, and is instead a fixed event, his mom could die decades in the future. Like of old days stage. Then there's Dark Flash. We found out he's a future version of Barry 2, the younger version of Barry in this timeline. Barry 2 sacrifices himself, and because he dies, Dark Flash never existed. His future was erased. It doesn't make any sense. If you killed your past self and you never existed, then there will be no one to kill your past self. Also, Dark Flash is the one who pushed Barry 1 out of the Speed Force and into 2013 in the first place. If Dark Flash never existed, nobody pushed Barry, and Barry lands back in the present. And since Zod destroys everything, the present shouldn't even exist. Therefore, Barry shouldn't exist. It's a giant plot hole that the movie presents as a heroic sacrifice with a clean resolution, when in reality it's dirtier than my internet search history. Why the fuck did I write this? The logic of time travel is literally bending to the whims of the writer. But my biggest issue is this. In the final battle, our two Barrys run back in time to retry the fight with Zod. And when they arrive in the past, the previous versions of themselves are still there. The movie just showed us on screen that every time you go back, a new copy of you exists alongside the old one. And you can go back as many times as you want. So why does Barry give up after one attempt? Why not go back 100 times? 1,000? You have 1,000 speedsters against a few Kryptonians. I don't care how strong Zod is, he is not winning that fight. The movie cannot follow this idea to its logical conclusion, because doing so would make the entire third act pointless. It's kinda like the 100 humans versus 1 gorilla debate back then. Like sure, 100 humans is still debatable, but 1,000? Yeah, that gorilla's going down. The rules of time travel in The Flash just simply don't exist. What exists are merely suggestions that the script follows when convenient and ignores when it isn't. The logic of the movie is basically whatever the current scene needs to be true. On the other hand, we have Steins Gate, and in Steins Gate, our hero, Okabe Rintaro, or as he would rather call himself, the mad scientist, Hyowin Kyoma, runs a lab out of an apartment above a TV repair shop. Their greatest invention is a time machine. Well, sort of. Let me show you how simple Steins Gate time travel is. Time is a line. When you change the past, the old line disappears and a new one takes its place. There are only two possible timelines. Alpha, where Mayuri, Okabe's childhood best friend, always dies, and Beta, where Kurisu, the genius he falls in love with, always dies. There's also a divergence meter that tells you which one you're in. That's it really. No over-convoluted explanation needed. And the way the show teaches you this rule is exactly what The Flash skipped. Small experiments before the big stakes. The characters discover time travel by sending a text message to the past and the timeline shifting. They do it again. Lottery numbers. A friend's family history. Someone's entire identity rewritten by a single message. And every single time, the same thing happens. Old timeline gone, new timeline in its place. And only one person remembers what changed. The audience learns the rules by watching them go through trial and error, not by listening to someone explain it using spaghetti. But the core thing that makes Steins Gate's logic so airtight is that the logic and rules hold, even when breaking them would make the story simpler and easier to tell. At one point in the story, Mayuri dies, so Okabe does what anyone with a time machine would do. He goes back and tries to save her, and he tries over and over and over again. She gets shot, he tries again. She gets hit by a train, he tries again. And just when he thinks that nothing can hurt her anymore, her heart just suddenly stops. The anime is showing you through repetition that time has rules Okabe just cannot brute force his way past. And unlike The Flash, where Barry gives up after one retry despite the movie showing us he will try infinitely through Barry 2, Steins Gate shows Okabe trying over and over, and the show still won't bend because Mayuri's death is a fixed point in the beta timeline. The logic doesn't care about his feelings. It doesn't care that she's his best friend. The rule is the rule, and when he does finally find the way out, it's by finding a loophole within the system that still follows the rules. He can't save Kurisu and keep Mayuri alive in the same timeline. The rules won't allow it. So instead, he finds a way around the rules. Not break it, he fakes Kurisu's death by using his own blood so that his past self still sees her body on the floor. Because the timeline doesn't require her to be dead. It requires the past version of him to believe she's dead. He solves the puzzle by creating a paradox using the show's own logic. And the audience gets to feel smart because they were given every piece they needed to figure it out themselves. That's what logic looks like when a writer actually respects it. The rules never break to save a scene, because every time a rule breaks, your audience's trust breaks with it. Hey, if you've enjoyed the video up to this point, make sure to subscribe and join in the Discord. It is a choice of Steins gate after all. The second L stands for limit, because time travel cannot be allowed to solve every problem it creates. Drama is impossible without obstacles, and a near omnipotent device is an obstacle eraser. The writer has to engineer scarcity into the mechanism itself. What the machine can't do is more important than what it can. Limitations create drama. Power destroys it. Time travel is a sort of stress test for the writer's restraint. The best stories survive because the writer chose to limit a near omnipotent device. The worst stories collapse because the writer used that device to dig themselves out of every plot hole. The Flash hands Barry Allen the power to change time without any limits and then act surprised when there's no story left for him to run towards. But you can't outrun death, taxes, or bad writing, because unlike Flashpoint, the comic this movie is supposedly based on, Barry doesn't lose his powers the moment he tampers with the timeline. Instead, the movie introduces this convoluted rule where Barry loses his powers because Barry too didn't get his powers from the original lightning strike, so they try to recreate the accident. Now I know a lot of people took issue with Barry getting his powers back from a random lightning bolt without the chemicals, but I actually think that's fine. In that scene, the first attempt failed, but Barry was already soaked in the chemicals from the previous try, so the second strike giving him his powers back still makes sense for me. What doesn't make sense is this. We see Barry too get injured, and we see how his injuries propagate forward to his future self, Dark Flash, but they don't affect our Barry. So by the movie's own internal logic, Barry 1 was never truly tethered to Barry 2's powers in the first place, meaning if he didn't recreate the accident and got hit by lightning and doused with chemicals again, he wouldn't have lost his abilities at all, which means he could, by technicality, time travel infinitely without consequence. His only so-called limitation is that he needs to eat a lot of food, which is more of a limitation of his super speed than time travel. That's like saying the leading cause of death is being born, which by technicality is true, but you know. I covered a lot of the Flash's logical failures in the previous section, but the limit problem is what ties them all together. Permanent consequences matter more than spectacle, and the Flash ignores that entirely, choosing instead to prioritize cramming the movie with cameos and nostalgia, so you'll forget that the plot is just one enormous hole with a tiny bridge of stories stretched across it just wide enough for you to stumble to the ending. Look, if you're writing a time travel story, there's one question you should ask yourself to find out whether your machine is a storytelling device or a storytelling crutch. Does the time machine create more problems than it solves for the protagonist? If yes, it's a limit. If no, it's a cheat. So let's look at a time machine that actually ruins its protagonist's life. Steins Gate buries its characters in limits. Every version of time travel they build comes with caveats. The first iteration, D-mails, only works through text messages sent to the past, and each one is capped at 36 bytes. Not even megabytes, just bytes. That's about 18 Japanese characters, and maybe just one very short English sentence. You can never exactly say what you mean, so every message has the potential to create consequences you didn't intend. And even getting the message to the right person is a problem. You need their phone number, their email address, in some cases their fax number if your target is far back enough in the past, and even then you cannot guarantee that the recipient will listen to you. This isn't theoretical. There's actually an episode that explores this where Okabe discovers a traitor in his group, Moeka, a member of their future gadget lab who turns out to be a CERN double agent. The D-mails she had Okabe help her send were designed to help CERN acquire the IBM 5100, a machine the team needed to hack CERN's database and delete the very first D-mail ever sent. The IBM was in the team's possession until that D-mail erased that reality. Later, when Okabe is systematically undoing every D-mail to reach the timeline where he can save Mayuri, he tracks down the numbers he needs and sends a message saying the IBM's location. The shrine is a trap, but the past version of Moeka ignores it completely. She will only act on the message from someone called FB, her handler. Okabe can't just press send and fix the problem. He has to actually figure out who FB actually is in the present using detective work before time travel is even useful. The limits force him to earn every single correction. The second iteration of time travel, the time leap machine, which sends your brainwaves back into your past self, has its own hard ceiling. You can only jump back to the moment the machine was first calibrated to your brain and connected via an active phone line. So you can't just leap back to before CERN existed and strangle whoever made the organization while they're still a baby. The range is finite, and then there are the costs that compound compound with every attempt. The team's hack into CERN's database gives them access to it, but also opens a two-way bridge. CERN can see what they're doing. Every D-mail sent increases the risk of being found. Every D-mail undone delays Mayuri's death by just a few hours. The clock is always ticking and the margin gets thinner every time. And underneath all of that sits the heaviest cost of all, the one no machine can quantify: Okabe's mental state, watching Mayuri die over and over again. His childhood best friend, the person closest to him, shot, hit by a train, heart just stopping for no reason, and being functionally powerless against it just by holding a time machine in his hand. That kind of despair breaks a character. Unlike Barry Allen, who walks away from his one failed attempt and knowing it's a fixed point, Okabe tries over and over and even breaks down multiple times before realizing. The third L stands for layer, because time travel is the layer. The best time travel stories are not about time travel. They're usually about something else. The mechanism is the metaphor. Underneath it must be a story that's actually about something else: grief, love, regret, stagnation, identity, family. The test is simple. Peel the time travel off and ask yourself, is there still a story there? Back to the Future is about taking personal responsibility for one's destiny. Edge of Tomorrow is about grief and growth. These stories use time travel to focus on a deeper subject, because time travel is the layer. Whatever sits underneath is the point. Here's Bob Gale on the third L, or as he calls it, the golden rule of time travel. Never use time travel as an excuse for the plot. And for those of you writing a story with time travel, that's a quote you should live by. And to give credit where it's due, The Flash actually didn't use time travel as an excuse for the plot, but instead as a metaphor about grief and acceptance. I mean, the whole movie happens because Barry wants to prevent his own mom from getting murdered and save his dad from being framed for it. You know, that's an actual emotional foundation. Props to them. Throughout the movie, he learns that some things just don't have a solution. That sometimes the answer is that there is no answer. Yeah, the subtext is so loud it's basically just text, but the layer is there. Barry goes back in time, saves his mom, watches his entire world collapse because of it, goes back again, undoes it, and has a tearful goodbye with his mother, where he finally lets go. He accepts loss and stops running from it. Lesson learned. Movie over. Except I lied. It isn't over just yet. You see, I left something out. Early in the movie, we learn Barry can't get his dad out of prison because the security camera footage never caught his face. He didn't look up, so the court couldn't confirm it was him. And in that final trip back in time, after the tearful goodbye, after the lesson about acceptance, Barry moves a can of tomatoes to a higher shelf so his dad has to reach up and look directly into the camera. The court admits the footage, and his dad goes free. I'm sorry, what? The movie just spent 2 hours telling us that you need to accept loss, that some problems don't have answers, that messing with time only makes things worse. Then in the final 5 minutes it says, oh, never mind, time travel actually did fix this other problem though. Have a happy ending. Oh, and George Clooney. It's like watching a man lecture a kid for pocketing candy at a convenience store, make him put it back, teach him that stealing is wrong, and then put on a ski mask and rob the register at gunpoint. You'd think that after almost destroying his universe and countless others, that Barry would learn to stop messing with time. But instead, he changed it yet again, got rewarded for it, and walked away with zero consequences. Barry Allen learned nothing throughout the story. On the other hand, Steins Gate's entire story is built on time travel. The story's entire premise is about time travel. So how can I say that it's not about time travel? Because even the creative director of the series, Chiyomaru Shikura, said it himself. Steins Gate is really a drama about people. And putting aside the fact that, he created the series, he's right, because underneath the D-mails and the divergence meter and the world line shift, Steins Gate is a story about the weight of impossible choices and the man learning how much he's willing to destroy to save the people he loves. You see, in order to save Mayuri, Okabe has to undo every D-mail his friends ever sent. Every single 1. And each D-mail granted someone a wish, something deeply personal that they never would have had otherwise. So saving Mayuri means ripping those wishes he gave them away, one by one, with his own hands. And it's cruel to hand someone the happiness they've craved for years, only to tear it away once it's already in their hands. Ferris used her D-mail to prevent her father's death. Her dad died when she was 8 years old, and the last thing she ever said to him was that she hated him and wished that he would die. That guilt haunted her for a decade, and her D-mail brought him back. She got years with him that she was never supposed to have, and now Okabe is standing in front of her, asking her to send him back to his grave. Ferris breaks down, but she agrees because Mayuri's life is on the line. Okabe watches the world line shift, and Ferris remembers nothing. She's back to her usual playful self. She has no idea what she just lost, but Okabe remembers everything, because he always does. Then there's Luca. Luca's D-mail changed the circumstances of her birth. In this timeline, she's living as the person she wanted to be, a girl. She fell in love with Okabe along the way, and when Okabe tells her that the D-mail has to be undone, it devastates her. It makes her cry, but she understands this is to save Mayuri's life, so all she asks him is to take her on a date first. One date, that's all she wants. One afternoon as herself with the person she loves before it all gets erased. Okabe agrees. The date is awkward and clumsy because Okabe can barely hold himself together, and after the date, he gets Luca's mom's fax number, and Luca runs away sobbing. Okabe sends the D-mail, and Luca is born a boy again. When the timeline shifts and Okabe asks if Luca still has feelings for him, Luca dodges the question entirely. He just blushes and says, "I respect you." The love is still there. It just lost the only world where it was allowed to speak. And each time Okabe undoes a D-mail, it delays Mayuri's death by a few hours at most. He's destroying lives for slightly more time before he has to watch her die again. This is what layer looks like when it's working. The time travel creates the situation, but the story underneath it is about guilt, grief, sacrifice, and whether love can survive the cost of saving it. Peel the time travel off of Steins Gate, and there is still a story underneath. A man being slowly crushed by the price of his own compassion. But the thing that separates it from the Flash at the deepest level is that Okabe breaks. He doesn't power through it with a heroic monologue at first. He gives up after watching Mayuri die over and over again and systematically dismantling his friends' lives. He drops the mad scientist act, sits on a rooftop, and says that he's done with all this. The guy who spent the whole show calling himself Hoin Kiyoma, the great mad scientist fighting the forces of the universe, is gone. There's just a kid on a roof who just can't do it anymore. And the thing that pulls him back both times are the people he's breaking himself to save. Kurisu and Mayuri. In the middle, when he's about to give up on saving Mayuri, Kurisu motivates him, repeating the thing that he's been saying to her this whole time. "You're going to save the world, aren't you?" In the final stretch, when Okabe is ready to give up on saving Kurisu and let World War III happen because he's convinced himself that it's impossible, Mayuri slaps him, tells him that he can't just quit because he's not the kind of person to quit halfway. And it's only after that, after the person he nearly broke himself trying to save refuses to let him give up, that's when the mad scientist, Hoin Kiyoma, makes his grand return. The version of Okabe who refuses to accept an impossible choice and finds a way through it anyway. The version that says deceiving the world is nothing to him and that this world is in the palm of his hand. That's what Layer is supposed to be, because at its core, Steins Gate is a story about love, impossible choices, and what people do under pressure. Time travel is just how it's told. Rip away the time travel and Steins Gate will still forever be Steins Gate. And that's not just my opinion. The creative director, Shikura himself, said that as long as the core emotional beats are preserved, everything else is negotiable. The setting, the cast, even Akihabara. Because in his own view, the identity of Steins Gate is not really the sci-fi premise or the Akihabara aesthetic. It was the human relationships underneath it. And once you realize that, it reframes the entire series. Steins Gate was never about time travel. It's about a man who has to learn that love makes you responsible for choices you can't bear to make, and that sometimes the only honest response to an impossible choice is to refuse its terms entirely. But how did we as human beings even come up with time travel as a concept in the first place? There's a quote from H.G. Wells, the guy who arguably started all of this, and he said, "We all have our time machines, don't we? Those that take us back are memories, and those that carry us forward are dreams." And I think he's right. I think we're all time travelers, not in the cool way, not with a microwave and a banana or super speed, but in the way that matters, because you have a moment, everyone watching this has one, a conversation you replay at 2 a.m., a version of events where you said the right thing, or didn't leave, or picked up the phone. You've traveled back to that moment so many times you could draw the room from memory, and every time you go back, you rewrite it a little, smooth out the parts that hurt, sharpen the parts that justify you, edit the memory until it stops being what happened and starts being what you needed to happen. The logic breaks and you don't even notice, and you go back again and again without limits, reimagining the perfect scenario where everything works out. But maybe the reason we keep going back is because we're scared of what's ahead, because the past is safe. You already know how it ends and you can change it in your head. The future though doesn't give you that luxury. But you wouldn't be who you are right now without the version that hurt. We are our past, every ugly, unfixable piece of it. So instead of burying the layer, learn from it. Because Okabe didn't solve his problem by changing the past. Every time he tried, the world broke a little more. Okabe solved it by being Hyoin Kyoma, a dreamer. Someone who stopped rewriting what was and started fighting for what could be. Because we all have our time machines, don't we? Those that take us back are easy. Anyone can climb into a memory. The hard part is building the one that carries you forward, and that one's called a dream.